Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. If you recall, the last class that we were having, we were talking about how to measure culture. And in that class, I had also said that we will talk about some core value systems by which cultures are normally measured. Those are the factors around which cultures are built. And in that, I'd also mentioned that we would like to show you certain subcultures, because most of the discussion in the books on consumer behavior relate to subcultures which belong to the Western world. So we thought we would bring some subcultures of Pakistan and show it to you in terms of how they are and what they represent. But before I go into today's lecture, which obviously relates to the cultures, the core value systems on which cultures are based and around which we try and measure cultures. But we would like to reiterate a few points so that we are again focused on the issue that we have in front of us. The discussion of culture or consumer behavior is not just something standalone, because we have been speaking, but since marketing area or strategy area is not related to consumer behavior in terms of the class session that we are having, but this forms a core issue of marketing strategy. So we need to keep reminding ourselves as to why we are studying consumer behavior and what is the significance of the cultural frames that we are talking about in terms of how it relates to the marketing context. So it's just a little bit go back onto it so that we are very clear and we have another focus, refocusing ourselves again onto the subject area. I told you that the strategy or marketing area, which relates to the management of marketing, normally positions itself on three distinct points, which is segmenting the market, targeting, and then positioning. Now, we have been very categorical in repeatedly saying that unless and until the marketer becomes very clear as to what are the needs of the consumers, and if he is not very clear about the consumers, he will not be able to provide the product or services which are required by the consumers. But beyond that, to be able to do a good job in comparison with competitors, the requirement would be to be very focused on the consumer, which requires the first step of the STP framework, which is to break the market down into segments. Now, it is in the segmentation process that most of the discussion that we have been having on social classes, on value systems, on walls, that is the lifestyles, as well as culture, are focused on. And we try and segment the markets using these frames. And at the end of the lecture, when we look at the cultural frames, we will be able to see the distinctions or the separations between subcultures, which could constitute a major point of segmentation, other than, as we discussed, the demographic frameworks or geographical frameworks or maybe social class frameworks, even the use of value systems and attitudes all form part of the way you can break the markets down into segments. But that is not the end of it, because once you have chosen the target, which has got a different connotation, the idea would be to be able to position the product or your service in relation to your competitors in the targeted market. Now, we have already discussed quite extensively the logic of communication and the problems that you face while you are communicating a message, and the message is nothing but how we want to position our product. And to be able to do that, we need to be very clear how would we communicate to the people. And this communication process, we said, has noise in it, has meanings, has perceptions, and so on and so forth. So culture is one frame which helps us to understand how people look at things, how people perceive things. And to be able to do that, we need to carry out regularly studies of culture. Why? Because there are two frames which are coming through. One suggests that cultures are converging. And in the next lecture, when we look at age subcultures, we will be able to see that age groups, for example, teenagers, more or less around the world, have tended to converge in liking certain types of, let's say, music, clothes, and so on and so forth. But there is a controversial idea also which says that there is divergence in cultures, and that normally tends to come from the religious cultural breakdowns, because religion is also a part of the subcultural framework, and we can see that sometimes religions are strongly entrenched and they create segments, or they create subcultures which are extremely distinct. On the other side, like I'm saying, in the age category, the distinctions are eroding. Youngsters or older people, when we discuss the various generations, you'll see that broadly they are converging into certain patterns of behavior which can be recognized generally, and that is what is facilitating the marketers who try and launch or market their products worldwide. And in that, we will also see there some advertisements which will be showing the same ad which is targeted to various countries, which means that basically the people living in different countries would like to see the same kind of product in the same kind of a perceived framework. But like I said, this discussion will continue. But the point that I wanted to make before we started is that cultures are ways by which we can understand and make our job easier in trying to communicate whatever we want to in terms of position that we have secured for our product. And we said that if the position is not clear in the consumer's mind, there are enough number of examples where the products or the brands have failed. Why? Because they tended to confuse the markets. They tended to confuse the consumer because they were not able to set a distinct, distinguished, differentiated framework for their product or brand. And since people could not see them distinctly, they tended to ignore the communication messages that we would have. So now let's go back to our lecture where we were talking about the core values around which normally cultures are assessed. But just to look at it and how do we measure these frameworks, we had talked about that there are certain methods like content analysis in which we tend to collect all written material and analyze the contents of that written material to come to a conclusion related to one of the factors which we will discuss. For example, one of the factors that we could look at is time. How do various cultures view time? Now, we can see that obviously time is only 24 hours in a day, but the way time is used, the way time is spent becomes an important criteria. Some countries, basically like Japan, most of the time is spent in working. Very short periods are available for relaxation or leisure. On the other side, there are some people who try and balance the two systems. On the other category, there may be people who are more into leisure rather than into work conditions. So that is just one of the frames in which we will be looking at the core values around which things are built. One of the greatest researchers in this area who has been writing extensively on cultures around the world is Hofstede. And at the end of the lecture and in the notes, I will be giving you a brief article which would try and link up this differences in the cultures on another categorical area, because at this point of time, we're looking at it from the consumer behavior point of view, but cultures are also studied in terms of their aspects like masculinity and femininity. Male is considered to be most probably do not show emotions, but the feminine side shows emotions. And countries and cultures can also be broken down into this frame. We will be talking about it when we come to the international context of cultures and behaviors. But now we go back to the area of core values of culture. And like I said, measures are content as well as from observation in the field work. And the thing that we will be doing, as I said, at the end of the lecture, when we will be showing you some culture, this you can construe as a form of observation. because that is the way we will try and evaluate a little bit about the cultures or the subcultures of Pakistan. Now, we have a definition which we gave you before also, and that is that values are long-term and beliefs, which is part of the cultural frame, is short-term. And that also requires that on the values, most of the people should agree. That means the majority of the people who constitute subculture or culture must have a kind of a consensus that this is a core value, not in terms of that they will sit together and agree on it, but their behavior around that value system is consistent over time. So that becomes the method by which we discuss the area of values. Now, I'll go one by one and we will have a little bit of a discussion to see the areas, and I will also try and give you examples. Some are derived from international literature, some are observations that we have about the way we look at things. The first and the foremost is the concept of achievement and success, which means how do cultures relate to this concept of achievement and success? First, we need to distinguish between the two. Achievement is basically intrinsic, which means I do something and it is for myself and I feel pride in what I have achieved. It does not require any person externally to acknowledge that I have achieved something. On the other side, success is something which requires external acknowledgement. That means if I have succeeded in doing something, I want a reward for it, or I want some kind of recognition for it. So this distinction has to be kept in mind. And then we will look at how people in cultures tend to behave. For example, in the American culture, achievement is a very strong concept in the sense that people would tend to do things for themselves. A very good example is if we look at the Maslow's need hierarchy, and if you recall the Maslow's need hierarchy, at the top is self-actualization. So the top where we said it is self-actualization relates to the motivation of an individual where he tends to do things for himself. And that is what we are talking about in terms of achievement. If you recall, for example, there is a person, a lady who at the age of 67 or 65 climbed the Mount Everest. Now, the person was doing it for her personal, and the reason for her motivation to go and climb the Mount Everest would be basically something inside which does not require any acknowledgement from external people. Now, in the same area, research has been conducted, and it suggests that those people who are more achievement conscious would normally tend to browse on the internet for information which will help them to develop their selves, which would mean that they will look for courses, they would look for information and other areas where their personal self-development becomes critical. Now, how does it help marketer? Now, if I knew that in my target market, one of the core values that is being used is achievement, then I would be more inclined to put my messages or my marketing message or communication on those websites which actually try and help people to improve their selves, to do self-development or long life development takes place. So I will try as a marketer to, if my target market has a substantial number of people whose core values suggest that they are achievement oriented. But if there is somebody who is more towards success, which means he needs accolades और उसको लोगों की तरफ से शाबाश चाहिए, so we can mold the communication to try and say that this is something that is recognized as success. And in this case, we can have two distinct advertisements. If you would like to recall, there is one ad which is from L'Oreal, which says, I am worth it. The lady in the model says, I am worth it, which means it relates to the achievement sense of the person, and the person is internalizing the success factor and saying, I'm worth it, which means I've achieved something for myself and I don't need anybody else's acknowledgement. But on the other side, we have another ad where a father is giving a car or the keys of the car to his son who has succeeded, let's say in graduation, or has topped the class. And we have seen this kind of a ad being used particularly for the children, where brushing the teeth is being awarded not only by the school but by parents. And we would have seen a number of ads related to the use of soap or the use of toothpaste or something which keeps you healthy. So these are two distinct frameworks in which an award is given to suggest success comes from behaving in a certain manner, and the other suggests that there is an achievement that you already have and you should be able to reward yourself, which is typically what is represented by L'Oreal's ad of "I am worth it." Now, therefore, this achievement and success, if you study this within the system, it helps us to be very clear as to how would we be able to use this frame for our own product and for our own brand, and how to communicate this. The second one which we look at is the activity, or how do we involve ourselves in our life in the 24 hours that we have. Are we workaholics, which means we are so grounded in work that we do not have time to relax even? Or are we so much into relaxation that we do not spend time in the real pursuit of achieving things? These two are related. You can see that there is a certain relationship between it, because those people who really work hard are maybe doing it either because they believe and are self-motivated, or they believe that it will be reflected in some kind of an award that will come. These activities is also therefore linked with the children. And we can see that in some areas, I don't know how I can put it, but there was a time when the schools used to close for, let's say, 2 months in the summer, and the children were free to pursue their activities of leisure and sports and games, along with some classwork that was given to them to take home, and the work used to be done by the students in their homes, which was given by the school. Nowadays, what we find is that there are summer schools, which means the parents, for one reason or the other, either do not have the time to spend with the children, or there is a strong belief that there will be competitiveness is very high, and because this is a lot of competition going on, therefore children need to be consistently occupied in some kind of an activity. Now, in this case of some kind of an activity, therefore parents tend to send their children to summer schools where their education continues, though it is not actual school education, but it is, let's say, co-curricular or extracurricular activities are involved in it. But we have two connotations behind it. Whether the parents believe that the child requires this kind of training because the future is very, very competitive, and this is the most significant factor to achieve success. Now, that is one frame. On the other, it could also be related to their own activities where they don't have the time and they are involved so much in their work that they cannot give this kind of time or quality time to their children. So to compensate for that, they tend to send them to these schools. Now, like I was telling you about the concept of self-achievement, where people would go to the internet to browse for information which relates to their own being, there is another area of research which suggests that those people who are not really success-oriented or who do not have a sense for self-achievement, they tend to use internets, use the available systems for social networking. So you can really relate the context of cultures which are evolving around the world, specifically over the last 10 or 12 years. This is becoming more significant because as the internet and the computers diffuse into the social system, the cultures will tend to change, values will tend to arise, and there will be a shift. And this shift has to be used by the marketers most effectively. Like I said, if it is a social networking setup and the people who visit that are people of a particular value system or a lifestyle, then only social network channels would be used for promoting the products which are attuned or positioned for this kind of a target market. But if the target market is achievement and success oriented, what we will find is that those kind of websites which help individuals to develop would be more practically used. The third that we will be looking at is, after these two, is the concept or the core value of time. How do we look at time that we have? And obviously a related issue of time is efficiency. For example, if I believe that I have very little time left in my life, or I have a limited time frame in which I can achieve, then I will tend to use my time more efficiently. And obviously, if I want to use my time more efficiently, I will try and avoid places or areas where I would be thinking I'll be wasting my time. Now, logic says that if I avoid places where I think I'm going to waste my time, but the marketer whose product or whose services are particularly a place where I have to be, otherwise I will not use it, then what will I try and do is I will ensure that my system is so efficient that the people do not have to stay for more than a few seconds. However, here is where the issue of this concept of efficiency and value of time comes into position. You would have heard, but let me give you an example. Somebody actually asked Bill Gates, you know Bill Gates, the owner of the software that is used in all the computers, Microsoft, and he was asked in an interview that if he saw a $100 bill lying on the floor and he was passing, would he stop to pick it up? And his answer was no. So somebody asked him, why wouldn't you do that? He said, the time I will waste in picking up that $100 note, I would be able to make 10 times more in the same time period. Therefore, for that person, the value of $100 is, and the time value of time is actually calculated in terms of the dollar value. But on the other side, some people look at value of time in terms of quality of time that they spend. So we will have to look at these examples to be able to understand how cultures view time and efficiency. I would not try and conclude anything related to the culture in Pakistan or the subcultures, and I will let you judge for yourself how we in Pakistan tend to look at the time frame. And how do we use our time? Do we use it efficiently? Do we use it in a very non-efficient manner? I will leave it to you, but we need to be able to also relate the rationale behind this logic. People have already made mistakes in it. For example, one of the banks in the Western world where it is assumed that the value of time is in such a way that people would not like to waste even a few minutes on counter in a bank. Now, bank mein aap jaएं तो you know that you have to go to a window where you have to transact. Research, like I'm saying, had given this assumption that all people in the Western world have so much value for time that they do not want to even waste a few seconds in having a little bit of a discussion which is not to do with their work. So one of the banks in the Western world, let's say in UK, decided that they will become so efficient that they will have no time wasted of the consumer who would come in. So in their frame, it was very important for all the consumer service people who were responding to the customers that they would do their work like cashing a check or taking the money in the fastest possible time, and in a few minutes the person was allowed to move. But then they found that there was something missing because certain of their clients started leaving. This created another problem. So they tried to investigate what had happened. And they found that most of the people who were leaving their bank were people who had retired. Now, for a retired person, there was a different time frame and value of time, in the sense that they wanted to be seen to be valued in terms of somebody trying to communicate to them, ask how they are, what their work is, and so on and so forth. Whereas the younger group of people who were banking with these people were very happy with this kind of an affair, because the younger bankers, or the people who were banking with this bank, were actually managers or junior managers, and they did not want to even be out of their office for more than the necessary time. So there was a very strong distinction between two groups, which again, like I said, suggests that even on the basis of value of time, the market can be segmented. Now, this group of 60 and above, or retired and above, their thinking was that time is quality, and in quality, a few points of discussion, a kind of a social discussion is more important than the other group, which wanted immediate encashment of their instruments or quickly getting out of the bank so that they could go back to their offices. Now, for them, time was speed. Now, like I'm saying, this becomes a critical area. And if you go to various outlets in Pakistan, and we have already shown you a few, where you can see that at the checkout counters, in the shops which are influenced by the Western world, you'll find very speedy work being done at the checkout counters, people coming in, there are belts moving, and the invoices are made, payments made, and the client moves out. But in the traditional setup, where the shopkeeper tries to understand and know the consumer more than just as a customer, they would talk about the day, they would talk about so many other things, which is very typical. And that is what will be one of the factors on which we can distinguish cultures. Similarly, the culture that may exist in the rural area on this same time frame based would be different from the urban area cultures. And you will see, if you have an opportunity to visit Karachi, for example, their time is more closely used as in the Western world, particularly where the business and the business environment works. But in the rural area, where villages and agriculture is the main work area, there it will be totally different. So we need to be able to look at these two aspects in trying to understand the concept of efficiency and value of time, and we can measure cultures on that ground alone. The fourth we are looking at is progress. Now, progress is a fact of life. Every individual would like to progress in the social system. He will like to keep improving his life. But again, how much value do you put in this progress is also dependent on certain characteristics of the people involved. And that is why we will also see that there are certain statements that we find in the ads or in the advertisements or the messages that are given by companies. For example, you will find something like a slogan says new or improved or works faster or has increased strength, etc. All these suggest a kind of a progression in terms of the product, which may really not have too much of a change and most probably maybe just cosmetics, but it is actually targeted at the concept of the progress which one desires in life. So everybody would like to progress, for example, in terms of career, and that is normally reflected in terms of the progress that a person makes in the material things that the person owns, the things that the person buys, what he has and what he will have in the future. And the advertisers and the marketers have used this very regularly. Given this idea that we have now located in these four distinct characteristics, we should be able to get a good idea about what is the core value systems and how we can read these information. So another core value system that we would like to look at is the material comfort, what is assumed in life by people. Material comfort is how am I going to make my life more quality-wise improved, which is again linked with the concept of progress and the concept of success, because material ownership or material comforts are actually demonstrations of how successful I am. And it's a very good example, and I will read a small advertisement related to one of the magazines which actually catered to the high elite class in terms of a catalog. It's actually a catalog which is sent, and I hope you understand that one of the methods of marketing is using catalogs, which is sent to the homes of people, where people look at those catalogs and make a choice, call the number, and the product is delivered to their home while they pay through a credit card. Therefore, the company suggests that the reason why they have done it and why they are providing this kind of a service to that class is, let me read it for you. Now, they say the reason why Weave is there is that one might consider Weave to be a revival of the classic first floor of a departmental store, which traditionally displayed only the best of the best to a discriminating clientele. Now, having brought this is their original thought that they have, and they're suggesting that in some times when departmental store had just started, the people who used to visit them were of a very high society and elite class, and they would not go to the top floors, and whatever they wanted was taken at the lower floor level so that they could just go back rather than go around and searching for things. So what this magazine is doing is bringing that same concept back for the same social class. Now, further they say, by presenting each season's collection in a lifestyle context, we create an emotional connection with our customers who rely upon us to offer an edited collection of the very best of the season. By interspersing our selection with editorial and advice, we create an inspirational shopping experience, one where Weave is considered to be a trusted advisor to a beautiful life. Now think, what this magazine is trying to say to people is that a high elite class actually lives in material comfort, which means that one buys, one keeps things which are for their comfort, but which are of a very high class. This you can differentiate from another class or culture where people tend to sit on the floor, they eat on the floor, and that is considered to be of a high standard. The difference here is that some societies and cultures believe that owning material comfort is a reflection of success. On the other side, some would think that this is not relevant because there are so many other things which are more significant in a human being's life or a person's life. Having said this, the next core value that we would like to look at is basically the concept of freedom. Concept of freedom is not what we think in terms of political freedom or the other kind of freedoms, but here the concept is freedom of choice, which is something which distinguished the capitalist society from the communist society. And we as marketers, particularly in the capitalist society, have tried to use this concept of freedom of choice to produce more and more products, which actually tends to suggest to us that we have a freedom of choice to buy whatever we want to and have what we want among all the things that we have been located to. That becomes a very critical area of a concept of freedom of choice. That means I make choice of what I want. Finally, what we have is something very typical, and that is individualism or collectivism. Now, some societies and cultures tend more to be collectivistic, which means they tend to be grouped they would like to be more the importance given to a social life which is collective of people. There are other groups of people who look at individuals as the core person. The same logic which tends to suggest success of an individual rather than success of a group. Now, this again is linked with certain cultural values, and particularly in the Eastern cultures, more in the Eastern cultures, there is a concept of collectivism, whereas in the Western cultures, individualism is more significant. Having said all this, I told you that once I've discussed the core value systems, we will try and look at something related to the subcultures, because this discussion of subculture is consistent with the logic that segmentations take place, and segments within a broader culture, let's say of Pakistan, we will find segments of subcultures which will be unique and which would require different marketing and communication skills, because people tend to have different approaches, perceptions, and so on and so forth, which is what I mentioned in the beginning of this lecture. So in the next 10 minutes, we will try and look at few clips and which will demonstrate, and the people who are going to be involved in this will present the various cultures. Actually, this is a video of a theme where cultures were presented by groups of people, which made it easier for us, because rather than going everywhere and trying to find, we got people to do the research, and they brought this research in the shape of the dresses and explanation of the various cultural frames. While we are showing this, I will also keep discussing certain points which relate to the context of marketing and commerce with the area of culture. Let me from the very outset apologize if the researchers who presented these cultures have not been able to do a very accurate job. That is the first thing I would like to suggest. But if you have seen it carefully, you would be able to at least distinguish between the way people dress up, which is very distinctive in the framework that we have demonstrated. Then you might have also seen the kind of things that were placed there in terms of the crockery or the various products that were positioned. They are all distinct, and whatever was being said related to the broad aspects of the culture. Now, this basic frame should give you a very good idea that there is so much in the cultural areas that we can really use in our marketing systems. Having said all this, let me conclude today's lecture and we go back to where we started from so that we have an idea. We talked about how cultures are measured, but we also had to look at the factors around which cultures will be measured. I mean, it is very difficult if I want to measure culture in one form and another one wants to measure the culture in another form. We will never be able to distinguish and find homogeneous groups, as we call in the segmentation framework. But the one that we have discussed, which covered time, area, achievement and success, progress, freedom, individual and collectivism, all related to the various factors around which cultures are measured and considered. Finally, what we looked at was a brief video about subcultures and broad discussion of these subcultures or the frameworks within the subcultures. We will continue in the next lecture, where I will also try and bring into position a further subcultural group which is based on age. So these subcultures that we showed you relate to geographical locations within Pakistan, the various ethnic groups, the various languages that we speak, and so on and so forth, which will help us understand the basic concept of subcultures. Having come to this framework, we would like to now continue in the next lecture, not only on the area of the cultures or subcultures, but we would like to look at the value system. And in this, I would like to show or show the chart where we had the VALS system, which is VALS, which is basically value and lifestyle. And we will try and relate these concepts with that actual positioning. And this, then we will be able to relate the two factors that we have been discussing, as well as the application of it in certain categories. And then what I'm going to suggest is that when we are, or when you are going to be researching various cultures or subcultures, you might like to add another frame in understanding that subcultures using the VALS system. Also remember that this VALS system is a trademark system, so you will not be able to get the underlying questions or framework which is involved there, but it's a tool. If we look at the broad characteristics given in the VALS system, we should be able to draw up our own frameworks by which we can study the various subcultures. So given the core value systems for evaluating the subcultures as well as the VALS system, we will have enough tools to be able to study the concept of culture from the point of view of consumer behavior. Now, having concluded this and remembering that we will be starting this issue of age and subcultures in a little bit more detail, I take leave and see you next time. Allah Hafiz.